Hello, everyone, and welcome this morning to episode 141 of the Citrix session. I am your host, Bill Sutton. I have with me a couple of folks from, like normal, a couple of folks from the Cloud Software Group and Citrix, Todd Smith and Geremy Meyers. Todd, you want to say hello to the group?
Hey, Bill, and hey, everyone joining in today.
Yep, thanks,
Can't
Todd.
believe it's almost the end of summer.
Yeah, I know, definitely getting there. First day of school for where I live was this morning or today. This is August 21st. Yeah. My kids don't go till tomorrow because they let the ninth graders and the sixth graders go on day one to get used to the school, and then the rest of them go on day two. So also with us, of course, as usual, is Geremy Meyers. Geremy, you want to say hello to the audience?
Good morning. And Todd, it's good to see you. I feel like it's been a couple of weeks since we saw you last, so welcome back.
Yeah. For sure.
Traipsing around Canada has been my forte.
Oh, really? What part of Canada have you been around?
So I've been to Ottawa. I've been to got a trip coming up in October that we're planning out for Calgary and Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
And then traditional getting out to Vancouver and other sites within British Columbia. So
Doing a little traveling, huh?
just a little.
Just a little. Yeah, I was actually out in Dallas, very hot Dallas, last week with my team for a little bit of training, but it's much cooler here for sure, but more humid. So there's something to be said for dry heat, right? You know, you get out to Dallas, it's 97, but you walk outside and you're not, it's not like you're walking into a sauna. It's hot, but you're not walking into a sauna like when it's 97 here and it's 85% humidity. It's like walking into a wall. You walk outside.
It gives you a hug. It gives you one big hug.
Exactly.
So speaking of Canada, Todd, did you know today's it's a holiday in parts of Canada?
In the Yukon.
In the Yukon, yeah, I didn't realize this. It's Discovery Day in the Yukon. What do you think they discovered in Canada, or I guess in the Yukon, that they give it its own day?
Yeah, it probably has something related to either gold or some type of elk or moose.
That is why we call you Big Data, Todd. It is they discovered gold in the Yukon, and it's the third Monday of August. So that's interesting. It showed up in my calendar. So we've got all these we got these calendars, within CSG. We import them in, and so since I have an engineer who's based in Montreal, I've got the Canadian calendar, and it popped up, and I was like, Tony, what is Discovery Day? And he goes, oh, I didn't realize that was going to show up, but it was pretty fascinating.
So are they, is it a national holiday, or at least that territory?
Provincial. Yeah.
It's provincial holiday.
Provincial holidays.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay. Interesting stuff. So let's go ahead and move forward. We're going to be covering an article entitled, a blog rather, entitled Simplify Citrix Workspace App Management with Global App Configuration Service, written by Emma Bland. This is from middle of July. So I'll kick it off here. Obviously, the focus here is on the Workspace app management, which is the Workspace app, of course, is the locally installed application that users will leverage to access their virtual apps and desktops. And this does a couple of things. One is helps with the management of the app itself, and the other is helps users enroll or access their applications in a much more simplified way. Geremy, you want to start off and kind of give a high level on this, if you don't mind?
So let me ask this question, because Bill, you're a long timer with Citrix. Is in the past, if I wanted to configure, I'll say Workspace app, I'll say receiver, I'll even go back to say the online plugin. So that'll take some of us back. But if I wanted to configure that, two things: one, how did I do it? And number two, what kinds of devices could I do it on? So we'll start with a little trivia.
Well, I think how you would do it back in the day, there's a couple of ways to do it, depending on which one you were talking about. But primarily, I think you would have leveraged GPOs. You would have imported an ADM or ADMX template into your Active Directory, and then you would have leveraged GPOs. The reality is, if you go back to the online plugin or the PN agent, there was the capability of being able to manage it with INI files, as I recall. But I don't know that I had very, very few people that did that. most leveraged GPOs. But the problem with that was the device had to be a member of the domain so that it could participate in the application of GPOs. And as we'll see as we go through this, one of the benefits of this is the ability to manage devices that are perhaps not joined to the domain.
So that's a really good point, right? And I think that is probably the biggest point the article tries to make is, historically it had to be a managed device because you were doing it with a GPO, you're doing it with INI files. So in that case, you had to have some sort of like physical access to the device. But even if you didn't, if this was domain joined, you could push out a policy, you could configure the heck out of the Workspace app or whatever iteration it was called at the time, which is fantastic. But listen, we got a lot of BYO, right? So how do you manage a device, or how do you manage this app when I don't manage the device? And so that is what one of the big things around the global app configuration service does. Now, it does a few other things outside of just what we consider access to like Windows apps, but that's a big change. And so that's what we're going to talk through.
Yeah, and I think to add on to the conversation here, I think the other big component that we're missing out on is, we're trying to get people productive on day one of their employment, right? And the way we used to have to do things is we'd have to ship them a machine or ship them some type of domain joined device. They would have to go to a physical office. They would have to connect to a company provided secure network in order to just gain access to those applications and those services. And that all changed, right? We've seen more and more employees working from home or working remotely.
Right.
They're not using company issued devices sometimes, and they're almost never connecting to a company LAN, right? So bringing back some old school technology and terminology here, which means that I couldn't even push it out via traditional software deployment methods. So we had to come up with some way to manage a fleet of devices and versions of this Workspace app. And, the reasons for keeping up to date on your Workspace app is, a lot of it's productivity, but a lot of it's security management too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key things, and we'll get to this in a minute, is not just the ability to manage the settings of the device, which we haven't really talked about, but to manage, of the app, but also to manage updates, new versions of the app, which historically we've had to manage in some sort of other method. So this is kind of the next iteration of merchandising server, right, guys?
Well, I'll even go a step further. Now, Todd will have to keep me straight here because he's actually done training on this, but eventually, I don't know if this is live yet, Todd, but the idea is there are certain pieces of software, non-Citrix software, that you might have to run on your device. So for instance, the Workspace app comes baked in with some Teams optimization, which is fantastic. What do you do for Zoom? What do you do for these other agents that, maybe aren't baked into Workspace app? Is you can update and manage some of these plugins as well. And that is a big game changer, especially for, again, unmanaged devices. So I know that is I know it was definitely on the roadmap. Is that a thing yet, Todd?
I don't think it's been officially released yet. I believe it was scheduled for tech preview coming up. We can verify that.
Okay. But listen, Zoom, WebEx, you've got any sort of like endpoint plugin, security tool that you need to manage on that endpoint. We can potentially do this with the config service as well, which is pretty slick.
Yeah. Well, that's
cool. If you think
that.
back of it, the installers always used to go and check for, do I have the right version of the .NET frameworks? Do I have the right versions of
Visual
the plugins?
C++.
Yeah. Nowadays, people don't want to have to sit there and click through 15 different checkboxes. They want it to automatically do that, right? And that gives us a lot more control, us as administrators, a lot more control over our environment, who can do, what users can do, what they can see, without having to go and turn the users into part of our update and management process.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's cover the first section of the article. This is a little bit different. We haven't really talked about this yet, so this is a good segue. The email discovery of storefront and workspace. So talk to me a little bit about what historically we've required when a user installs or gets a device with the Workspace app installed before this capability came about, how they got it configured to connect to their environment.
Yeah.
Which one of you guys wants to take that?
So I can take this because one of the challenges, and I mentioned this earlier, was having to coordinate a lot of activity for someone to start working on day one. Oftentimes we would send them out. I remember I go back to the days when you would get a letter, and the letter had your username and password in it, or some type of default password. So you could go. It was a one-time type of occurrence. It would give you a website to go to, and things like that. But that was complex. It was sometimes opening up some security gaps, some potential risks were added in there. So we wanted to be able to make that a little bit more smoother and streamlined. So this global app config app discovery service or auto discovery service really gives you the ability to search based on your email address. And that will go out and find you, point you to the right storefront URL that's already been populated with the correct domain information. You can set it up so it will give you it will allow you a one-time password and force you to change your password upon successful connection. It basically puts you in like a quarantine state until you go through that. And at the same time, it'll automatically detect what version of the Workspace app you've got running. Does that need to be updated before you can proceed even further? And then it turns that into a background task, right? So I don't need to worry about all of these end users trying to do updates on a regular basis. You almost want to give it and some people shudder when I say this, but you almost want to give it like an Apple type of experience where updates are occurring in the background. Microsoft is doing the same thing. It's no longer patch Tuesday; it's patch every day. There's something going on in the background when you reboot, and every once in a while you'll get a message saying, "Hey, your system needs to be restarted," or "Your application needs to be restarted." Same process. So people are getting more and more familiar with this entire concept.
Yeah, so I mean, this is really out of the box capability of literally where the user enters their email address in, as opposed to having to remember some sort of storefront address or some sort of website that they'd have to point it to a NetScaler or what have you. It's literally just the administrator configures it on the back end based, I presume, on the domain name.
Yep.
User enters their email address, including the domain name, and it takes them through a series of steps, gets them authenticated, configures everything. Like you said, Todd, if it determines that there's an update needed, it goes ahead and presumably applies the update. What's required on the back end, do you know, to make this work?
So there is a version of Storefront that needs to be running on the back end. And I believe it's called out in this blog post.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it says that it'll map the storefront URL to the domain, and then presumably the users claim it based on their email address, essentially.
Yep.
So this is really is going to make it easier for the end user, particularly to get ramped up and onboarded very, very quickly, because they don't have to struggle with getting the letter in the mail and dealing with all the URLs and other elements that are associated with this. Is this do you guys know, is this an add-on? Is this included with DAS? How is the customer entitled to it?
It is included with DAS, I believe.
Okay.
As long as you have a service, you're just trying to config the Workspace app. So it doesn't really take over the role of, like, say, an endpoint management solution.
Right.
Because it's just focused on the app itself. But if you need to leverage the app, there you go. So here's the interesting thing, right? So I think we tend to forget. So we've already talked a little bit about app management here, but there's a lot more baked into Workspace app than has been in the past. One of the biggest pieces is the enterprise browser, right? So a lot of times that gets looked over because you don't necessarily go in and actually download and install enterprise browser. It's a part of Workspace app. So as a part of this config service, there's several things you can configure. And one of those is, any of those enterprise browser settings, which at the end of the day is just a Chromium based, browser.
Right.
So a lot of options just to turn that on, whether or not you allow plugins, can you push out, bookmarks, things like that. What you can do within the app. So for instance, for the longest time, we've been able to, manage security for virtual apps, like copy and paste, printing, things like that. Now, these are all security policy settings that we can push out to that browser as well. So, essentially provide that same level of security posturing as we do, on a virtual app, on a XenApp, a desktop.
Yeah, so the user enrolls, logs in to Workspace app. They get the enterprise browser, and what you're saying here is that from a app version perspective, from the standpoint of policies and perhaps even updates, we can manage that browser, whether the device is joined to the domain or not. Very cool.
Yep.
And Bill, just to answer the question earlier about what, where and what versions do you need? So the Workspace app version, currently supporting on the current release 2106 as well as LTSR 2203. The one caveat is this is not available for the Workspace app for Linux.
Okay.
But for Windows, Mac, iOS, HTML5, Chrome, and Android, it is currently available.
Yeah, I saw in here as well that the automatic upgrades they're planning for future to do that for LTSR. It looks like the CRs are all covered, but for LTSR, I wouldn't imagine that would be too far down the road.
Yep.
So we talked a lot about the email discovery. The next item in the blog is the app version management, which we talked about kind of at the beginning, but let's round it out and make sure we didn't miss anything here. So I noticed some statements in the article or in the blog relative to being able to test out upgrades before pushing to production, which I think is something we've always wanted to have to do, is being able to test the latest version of the Workspace app and make sure that the upgrade process goes smoothly. Either you guys have any comments in that regard?
So when you think about how you used to do that with GPOs, you were probably installing Workspace app from, maybe a network location,
right,
or sending folks out that way. And in this way, you can sort of redirect folks. Let's talk about a version number. If you need to get an upgrade, it will yank it directly from the Citrix.com website, as opposed to you having to host that anywhere. But you can also set up, groups. So not only do I want to single out Bill as my test user, I'm going to push out a certain version. We're going to roll that piece out first. That works great. If not, guess what? You'll roll it back too. So there's a lot that we can do around testing, just versioning, picking, groups out, that sort of thing, which is pretty slick.
Yeah, for sure. And then the next item here is app configuration, which again, we talked about the ability to leverage the cloud-based management framework to configure and manage and keep updated the actual Workspace app itself. And you can apply settings to all users, whether or not they're domain members or not domain members. And the other thing I saw in here, which we might want to talk a little bit about, is being able to apply the settings at the store level, so they can be based on different use cases, as well as various things like policies that we would have historically done in the policy engine. We can enforce either that way or directly on the Workspace app around security, app protection, audio, etc. You guys want to elaborate on any of these?
Well, I think the biggest thing we're trying to do here is to get the security, those policies and those configurations set as soon as possible in the authentication chain and in the user experience chain, right? So if we can do more to set and protect earlier in the process, it's going to give a better user experience. It's not going to cause any further delays, but also make sure that protection is there. Protection and controls and restrictions are there as soon as possible.
Absolutely. All right. I think we've covered it. Really, there was two phases or two facets to this blog. One was the email discovery of storefront and workspace, and then the central management of the actual Workspace app itself, both from the standpoint of being able to manage configuration and policies, as well as manage the updates to the app itself. So that's really what this article is about. You guys have any closing thoughts before we round this out today?
Yeah, I want to go back to something Todd said. So again, this supports, Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, even Chrome OS. What's not supported is the Linux. However, let's think through that real quick. Linux is probably primarily delivered how? Probably through a thin client, right? So don't get me wrong. I'm one of those guys who does have a laptop with Ubuntu on it, and I do install Linux on it, but I'm probably a one-off, right? But for the most part, you're probably getting a Linux, workspace app through a thin client somehow. And how are we managing that? Most likely we're managing that through whatever the thin client management stack is, right? So for instance, we do a lot of work with iGel. Just managing it through the iGel console is really how we're managing that. Should not be surprising. Will we see this on Linux at some point? Probably. But that's probably why it didn't lead with, Linux being the first use case is, we're already doing that, usually using the thin client software itself.
Yeah, I'm sure that factored into the thinking here. To your point, Geremy, something like iGel leveraging their management framework, we can really, keep things updated, get them configured, use the onboarding service that's embedded in there or available in there. So certainly that makes sense why we would focus on the broader use cases, which is obviously Citrix following up with what they've been saying, what you guys have been saying for a while, which is meeting the customer where they are. And that is, a lot more BYO, a lot more remote working, and the complexities of maintaining domain memberships and having to push policies along that way, particularly with distributed workforce. This makes things a lot simpler to configure and manage the entry point, if you will, to the Citrix environment. So really good stuff. Any other final parting thoughts?
Yeah, I think as with all of our content in the blogs that we talk about, more information is available, or deeper, further information is available in the product documentation. You can also use TechZone. TechZone has been continuously updated with a lot of these new concepts, including architecture diagrams and deeper dive information in there. There's also a really great video talking about some of the Citrix features that we're talking about. And just a shameless plug, there is a upcoming webinar this week as well. And it's what's new with the Citrix business unit as part of Cloud Software Group. And that's going to happen on, I believe it's going to be Thursday.
Okay, great.
But if not, with all of our webinars, they'll be recorded as well. So you'll be able to, if you miss it, it'll be out there. Seems like
no such thing as a shameless plug.
There is no shameless plug, especially because I know Bill and I have been fired up about trying to do. We keep clicking that link, thinking it's an update to what's new, and as it turns out, it's a link to the webinar. So what I would say is go do the webinar. I can promise you, we'll probably cover what's covered in that webinar sometime relatively soon as well. So
I'm sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, well, look, thanks, guys. Appreciate your attention today and participation as always. We'll see you next time.
Excellent. All right, Bill. See you, Todd.
See you.